Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker shares insights on the role of corporate academies in building skills and accelerating performance. I'm pleased to welcome William Pelster, former principal, Deloitte Consulting, and co founder of Josh Bersin Academy, to share his global experience and talk to us about the role of corporate academies in building skills and accelerating performance. In the session titled Academy, Agility, Acceleration.
Great, Dilip. Thank you very much, and good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and go ahead and bring up my presentation. So give me just 1 second as I go ahead and pull that up here. And it should be coming up on the screen as we speak, and I'm going to go ahead and put it into presentation mode. And I have to tell you, it was fascinating listening to Vijay. As I was thinking back, I have had the privilege over the years to attend multiple Confluence events. First as a principal at Deloitte and founding the learning practice at Deloitte, and then in my role as chief learning officer at Deloitte when we did Deloitte University and built that out globally and got to tell the story at Confluence. And now as one of the founders of Josh Bersin Academy, working very closely with Josh Bersin. So just a real honor and a privilege to be here. And what a fascinating topic. And I was just reminiscing a little bit. I have to tell you just personally, my last international business trip was to India back in February when I had a chance to go to Mumbai and to Delhi. And then, as everyone knows, in March, the world kind of came to a screeching halt. And so that was pretty incredible to see that happen. And so as we go through here, let me go ahead and just kind of take you through what we're going to talk about today. So the first one here is really this idea of, hold on a second. Hopefully you're seeing my screen. There we go. The pandemic has created a forced transformation on all of us. We're going to talk a little bit about talent management, skills and capabilities, talent marketplaces. What does this all mean for my organization and me as the learning leader? And really, what's expected of me and how do I accelerate impact around learning? And as I was thinking and preparing for this session here, I reflected back on kind of the privileged conversations that Josh and I have been able to have with probably 350 organizations back in March and April when we were all just struggling with, my God, what is happening to us? Everything is changing, this forced digital transformation that Vijay talks about, things that were planned to take place over 2 years were happening in 2 days, and people were just incredibly resilient in the way that they were working their way through it. But I have to tell you, we observed a couple of things. We observed really two distinctly different types of organizations. We saw organizations on one hand that over the years had made investments in their infrastructure. They had built in agility into their model. They had the ability to pull data from multiple systems, and they understood how to push learning and capabilities out to the environment as new skills and capabilities were needed in this COVID environment. And their executive committees, boards were able to make decisions to check hypotheses as information was coming in and very quickly keep the factories running. In the US, we laughed, we nearly ran out of toilet paper, right? And so the toilet paper factories had to stay open. So they had to know, who was the workers above age 50, who were below age 50, what special skills and training did they need. And that's just one example of some organizations got through that very quickly. While I have to tell you, other organizations, they had the same questions and they had the same expectations and they could make the same decisions, but their infrastructure was old, their systems were disparate, so it was really hard to pull data. It took them days to pull data and really organize it in a way that executive committees can make decisions. And when they finally made a decision, reversing that and pushing the decision out and any kind of training or policies that were needed to help that decision come to life, it was just really, really challenging. And it really pointed to a lot of skills gap, a lot of technology gaps in organizations. So let's talk about this for a second here. So when we go through the presentation today, we're really going to do that through not just the lens of COVID, but let's take a bigger step back and ask ourselves, what does it mean to be agile? Because whether it's COVID, whether it's the next disaster, or just the competitor down the street, your ability to process and synthesize information, to make decisions, and then to upskill and reskill your workforce. If you can do that faster than the competition, you win the race. If you can't do it faster than the competition, then most likely you'll end up losing the race. It goes back to the gazelle story that Vijay talked about. So that's what we're going to be discussing here for about the next 40 minutes or so. And I would like to pull all of you into the conversation. So I'm going to ask Kunal to pull up a series of questions, just 3 of them. And it's really to set the stage around this very large audience and what you are wanting from this presentation and some of the expectations that are out there. So Kunal, if you are listening, if you could pull up question number 1 and provide that to the audience, that would be fantastic. And as you take a look at it, the first question is, how important is upskilling or reskilling to your company? And just go ahead and choose that answer, and we'll get the results back here in about 10 or 15 seconds. And I believe with this technology, I'll have to read the results and share it with you. But I'm really, really curious as to how important this topic is, because I hear about it every single day from the variety of clients that we talk to. And it looks like we're getting some results in. We'll let it go ahead and run for a few more seconds here. And then Kunal, whenever you close it out, let me know and we'll talk about the results. So how important is upskilling or reskilling to your company? All right, and looks like we've got the results that came in, and overwhelming 69% said it is your top priority. That's absolutely incredible. About quarter, 23% said it is a strategic priority, but I have to tell you, the 69% does not surprise me. This is a top topic for so many organizations out there. I am a little bit surprised because it looks like about 7% said this is really not an issue at all. Maybe in the Q&A towards the end, I can understand what industry you're working in there, just because so many organizations have this really as a top priority. All right, Kunal, let's go on to question number 2, and I only have 2 questions left here. So if you can go ahead and publish question number 2 and make that available to the audience, that would be fantastic. So question number 2, my learning organization is ready, prepared, and equipped to deliver on upskilling and reskilling. So that poll should be up right now, and please go ahead and answer. My learning organization is ready, prepared, and equipped to deliver on upskilling and reskilling. And I've had the privilege of talking to many, many learning leaders, and I can tell you this is a topic that causes them a lot of consternation as they try to figure out not the mechanics of upskilling people, but what should they upskill people to. And then Kunal, whenever you are ready to go ahead and close that out, go ahead and close it out, and I'd love to see the results. So my learning organization is ready, prepared, and equipped to deliver on upskilling and reskilling. We got the first numbers coming in here. It looks like about 57% say that they are ready to go ahead and tackle this topic. That is actually a very high number. That's fantastic. And about 42% are saying that they are ready and prepared to go ahead and make that happen. So those are very strong numbers. And we'll talk about that here in a second. And then given that, Kunal, can you go ahead and publish question number 3, and then I'll go ahead and go right into my presentation here. And question number 3, we have a standard definition for a skill versus a capability, and know how to measure it. And it looks like number 3 is published. And I tried to put a little bit of humor in here. So there's a difference between a skill and a capability. I think we know the difference, but not how to measure. We got this and are good to go. And what's the purpose of this question? And you're going to find out the purpose of the question towards the end of the presentation. There is a raging debate that goes on amongst many learning professionals around what is a skill versus a capability or a competency, and how do you measure, and what are all the different dimensions. And not saying that we have the right answer, but I can share some really great insights as we go along the way here. So 60%, it looks like we get the first results in, and about 60% are saying, yes, there is a difference between a skill and a capability. So yes, that is very true. About 20% are saying, hey, we are really good to go. We got this. And I wonder if anybody took the bait and did the more humorous questions. But this is really fascinating. So thank you very much for sharing that information with us. It really sets the context. So what I really got out of these first 3 polls here was, one, this is a critical issue. Your CEO is really watching what's happening here. There is a need and a desire to upskill. Your organization is ready, but wanting to know more information, and you wouldn't be attending this session if you didn't want to know more information. And you understand that there really is a debate going on around skills and capabilities. So let's take a look here and see how this all plays out. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to my next slide here. So I want to set a little bit of context, right? And so the context here is this desire to upskill and reskill across all different generations is incredibly strong, right? And it's across all the different dimensions that you would want or expect from skills. So whether it's digital skills or functional capabilities, or even things like emotional intelligence, I was really blown away that for millennials, learning more about these emotional skills is actually their top concern, and entrepreneurial skills. So it's fascinating that across all these different generations, there is a continued desire to upskill and reskill. And by the way, this was a study out of Australia, but I could pull up studies from just about every country in the world that mimics these types of results. And so with that desire to upskill and that business imperative around upskilling, this idea of learning in the flow has arrived. And that is, how do you actually connect this need and this want and this desire to learn with organizations and individuals where they are working and where they're doing the work? And what this has resulted in is really this explosion over the last few years of really, LXPs and different systems to really help you in the flow of work. And this particular slide here is really out of some of the adaptive learning research that Josh did with NIIT. And he's going to talk about that here in a couple of days. But what you see is organizations have invested a significant amount of capacity in really either the LXP or other with learning in the flow of work. One of the things I really put on your radar screen, so as learning professionals, we tend to look very closely at learning systems. The 2 other major corporate systems out there that can impact what you're doing from a learning perspective is everything that Microsoft is doing around Microsoft 365. Just think about this quantum leap we've taken in the last year around Teams, around the structures that we're using inside the Microsoft environment. They are an enterprise tool that continues to make a big splash around just the way we learn and learn in the flow of work, and I would keep a close eye on what they're doing there. And same with ServiceNow. ServiceNow with the whole service layer and the way that they're coordinating the flows. Again, from a learning perspective, they will be very disruptive over the next few years, and they should be on your roadmap as you think about not just learning, but the whole experience from a learning perspective. Adaptive learning, Vijay talked a little bit about this, and NIIT, working with Josh, did a major research study, and he's going to go really deep on this in his particular session, so I'm not going to go through a lot of this in detail, but here's the headline. When I talked about at the very beginning that we noticed that there were certain organizations as the pandemic started to hit that we were all thrown on our back. The tsunami knocked us to the ground, but certain organizations were able to pick themselves up, start gathering the data, processing information as it was coming in from different health authorities and the government, and making key strategic business decisions. The ability to do that was really this idea of being adaptive. They had not only adaptive technology, but they also had systems, structures, and people that created agility for their organization so they could pivot in whatever direction they needed to do. And for those organizations that had built that in as kind of a core capability, their ability to transition through COVID and get back into full operations was so much quicker than other organizations who just struggled every step of the way. And the NIIT team and Josh will go through this in more detail here in a couple of days. So with this focus, and again, just keeping this in context, with this focus on skills and capabilities, we're seeing a lot of activity around something called the talent marketplace. And all these different companies are coming at it from a slightly different direction. There is no universal solution around how do you actually solve the talent marketplace. There is one big insight I will share with you, though, that I have seen, and this is just speaking from personal knowledge here.
Yeah.
Yes?
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Your PPT, for some reason, it got chopped off. If you could put your PowerPoint presentation on.
Okay, give me 1 second. Let me turn that back on. Let me try that again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry to have interrupted.
Well, I apologize. I don't know why that dropped the way it did, but let me go ahead and get that back in the full presentation mode. And so when we think about the talent marketplace, what I want to be able to really emphasize here as part of this conversation is the technology is not a panacea if your underlying skills and capability framework is not well thought out. So if the organization, if you as an enterprise are looking for a silver bullet that is going to come from technology that's going to help solve your skills or capabilities issues, I can tell you right now that's not going to happen. If you have thought about your skills and capabilities and you've got a really good framework and you understand how you want to use it in the organization, then any of these talent marketplace solutions will accelerate the work that you're doing. So just again, a word of caution as you think about the talent marketplaces and the way that skills and capabilities are used. And in this, and I love this slide, actually it's from Josh, I took it from him. This is a brutally competitive area. There are so many different competing platforms out there. And again, everybody's approaching these things from slightly different angles. If you're not comfortable with this technology, you really need to find a partner like an NIIT or someone like that who can really help you navigate what each one of these things brings to the table, what it brings in the context of your particular needs as a business. And most likely not a single solution is going to solve your entire strategic needs. So you may have to like stitch or bundle some of these together, and you're just going to need some help thinking through that and just really being smart about how it shows up inside your organization. Side note, I'm actually working with an organization right now and looking at their technology stack, and they went through the process of allowing each of their learning orgs, and they had many different decentralized learning orgs to go out and purchase their own individual solutions. And individually, they found a solution that worked for their tiny little area of the business. When the CIO and the IT organization tried to actually stitch this all together, it created a nightmare user experience for thousands and thousands of employees. So again, just approach with caution, understand your needs, understand how they work together, and understand how they're going to solve the problem for your particular organization. So when we talk about talent mobility, because one of the reasons that we really look at skills and capabilities is for movement of talent. So one of the reasons we're looking at upskilling and creating new skills is as the competitive landscape or the needs of your organization change, you have the ability to move talent inside the organization much more seamlessly than you did previously. And so from a Josh Bersin Academy perspective, when we think about talent mobility, we think about it from really three different perspectives. And I offered up this very simple framework as a way maybe for you to start thinking about your talent and skilling and your mobility needs. So the first one is really from a plan perspective. And there are certain jobs and career models and roles, whether it's in the supply chain organization and growing world-class supply chain talent, or perhaps in the CIO organization and growing your IT talent, but you have clear roadmaps around skills and experience and tenure, your reputation and performance and certain gates very kind of laid out. So that's one part of traditional talent mobility. The second part is this idea of facilitated talent mobility, where as the needs of the business dynamically change, you're able to facilitate that. And so think about a merger and acquisition or a new business opportunity or an incubator that you're now ready to scale and bring to market. These are kind of facilitated talent mobility models. And then it's really, the last one is around agile. And that is, how do you create really seamless ways for people to skip through different models? They can change at any different time. And basically the talent can move seamlessly inside the organization wherever it's needed. So again, in the context of skills, talent mobility is very important, and hopefully this framework is helpful. Again, just putting this in context, there are many different vendors who play across all these different categories. And don't be shy about reaching out and asking for some advice and guidance on how these stack up against what you're trying to do from a career development, from gig work, from sourcing and recruiting, how all these different types of vendors play together and perhaps what their roadmap is. And so again, this idea that the talent marketplace driven by skills, it's going to be just part of your core functionality going forward. So I just wanted to set the stage because there's a lot of conversation around this. So now let's pivot ever so slightly to the world of corporate learning and what's really happening here. And so putting this into a little bit of context, if we rewind the clock back to the mid to early 90s, right, we saw this emergence of e-learning, and blended learning was really going to change the world. And then in the early 2000s, it was around talent-driven learning and what are we doing from the LMS and the platform as it continues to evolve. And for the first time, we're starting to include things like social learning. And then in 2010, 2012, digital started showing up on the landscape, and it was about learning on demand, and the LMS was starting to transform into an experience platform. Then this idea of learning in the flow of work. And today, more than ever, if academies are not on your strategic roadmap, I would encourage you to take a look at them. And we'll talk more about academies in a few slides. But as we look back over how corporate learning has evolved, we're kind of in this capability academy era right now, as people are looking towards academies to really solve some of the key learning issues that they have out there. So this is where we're at today, is kind of bridging between the LXP and the emergence of these capabilities academies. Also, for those of you that are learning and development professionals, the world of learning and development continues to evolve right in front of us. And if we put it through the lens of agility, right, and this idea of the agile learning organization, it becomes even more evident. So organizations that were ready transitioning to jobs and capabilities on the right, when COVID hit and agility was needed in the organization, they were able to flex and move across different skills for the organization in a way that more traditional jobs on the left were not. And the way that I like to think about these kind of evolving L&D roles, it's really through a product management hat. And so as you think about the role of a product manager, their job is to stay very close to their customer, to understand their needs, to constantly evolve the product, to do curation, to do the architecture, to communicate. And so these are evolving capabilities inside of L&D that, once again, if they're not on your capability roadmap from an HR or learning organization, I would strongly suggest that you do a little bit of self-reflection around, do you need these types of roles? Or perhaps if you want, reach out and we can give you examples of organizations that are using these types of roles to really make a significant impact in the way they deliver learning across the enterprise. Now, we've talked a little bit about the stage. We've talked a little bit around this emergence of talent marketplaces and why it's so important to be able to move talent around. Let's double click one layer down. And this is going back to that earlier question that I asked around skills versus capabilities. And I can tell you, this is not settled science. This is the Josh Bersin Academy perspective on how we think about this. But when we take a look at this debate between the job, the role, capabilities, and skills, where the majority of focus and action is today is really around capabilities. So that the job itself, with all the metadata around the job, exists in your HR management system. The role is actually where you're doing work and how you're measured on success. So that's where your goals and your activities and so forth are. On the far right, you've got all these tiny little things that are skills. Where it's really coming into play is on capability. And the reason we're focused on this idea of capability and we're talking about capability academies is because capability is where you're able to take the skill and apply it in everyday use. And so if you have the skill, but you don't know how to use it, or you don't understand the context of how to use it, you really don't have the capability. And so this idea that the learning organization has a bigger role and mission than just developing skills and upskilling, but it's actually about how do you create capability inside the organization is really critically important, and a reason again for why academies are coming front and center on this particular topic. One little diversion here. Josh did some research not too long ago with IBM and the Greater Good Science Center at Berkeley and Pymetrics, and they identified power skills. And these power skills may be things that don't look like normal skills or capabilities that a learning organization would develop. But I would tell you, these are things that make a difference. And if you remember back at the beginning of my presentation, especially for millennials, when they talked about the number one thing that they really want to grow their capabilities are around these emotional or these softer skills. These are some of the softer skills that they're wanting to understand. They're wanting to understand, how do you work together as a team? How do you actually develop tenacity, right? Hopefully they have integrity, but who knows, we might have to actually teach it. But these are power skills just to be aware of as you think about the entire capability set for your academy or what you're going to be focused on as a learning organization. And so another view here on the particular academies, right? As we take a look at the evolution of where we've been on organizations and developing capabilities, we started off on the far left with really this traditional training. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations are still kind of stuck in that mode. It's not bad. It's just not meeting probably the needs of the organization today. In between, we have this self-directed learning, which has really come about through the LXP. Unfortunately, though, if you don't have a lot of good governance around the LXP and some really good structure, your LXP can really turn into essentially a flea market of learning. And so you want to be really careful around how you manage and take advantage of the LXP. And then these capability academies have really emerged as ways to either develop functional expertise or to develop expertise on particular topics that are of importance to your organization, like digital or data science or cybersecurity. And we're going to talk a little bit more here in a few minutes around how do you set up these capability academies. A couple of more things, though, around skills versus capabilities, because is this an easy or a complex solution? And I can tell you, again, going back, there are many different components that come into whether or not you have a capability. One of the ones that I find incredibly intriguing is this whole idea of reputation, right? And so when you're thinking about capabilities, it's your reputation, it is who's following you, the type of feedback you've gotten, the projects you've worked on, your employment history. Skills clouds are trying to data mine all this and do it automatically for you. That's fantastic. I have not seen it done incredibly well yet. I would say this is emerging science, and hopefully in 2 to 3, maybe 5 years, this will become much more solid science. But right now, you really have to have a strong foundation around the way that you think about skills and capabilities for your organization. And one of the ways that we've tried to simplify this is really around, helping the skills cloud to be much better at what it does, right? And so if you have an underlying framework and structure that allows the skills cloud essentially to better understand the tagging and the indexing and the context and the career matching, you're going to get much better results from some of these automated systems that are out there, but it still requires work from you to go ahead and make that possible. And very quickly, for those that don't know very much about LXPs and how the recommendation engines work. Really, there are three different ways that the engines work. There are skills-based, where they look at underlying skills models, and Degreed and EdCast plays really strongly. Usage is also a model, and of course EdCast and 360 Learning and Degreed play in that space. And then you have AI content-driven ones, driven more like by IBM Watson, and how they actually look at many different data points and basically try to synthesize that and determine and infer what your skills are, and make those recommendation engines as we go along. Really quick, I talked about the new capabilities for L&D. And again, I put this in here a couple of times because I'm really trying to emphasize the way that the learning organization is evolving to really deal with skills and capabilities. So with that, let's talk about academies. And Kunal, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and put up the last two poll questions. Can you go ahead and put up question number 4? Are you thinking of building an academy this year, physical or virtual? And I need to switch into this mode so I can see what's going on here. And poll 4 is out there. And we'll give it a second. Are you thinking of building an academy this year, either physical or virtual? My gut would be that the majority of them being built would be virtual, but you never know. And as soon as we get the results, we'll go ahead and publish them. And about 30 more seconds and we'll get the results. Are you thinking of building an academy this year? Yes, no, or maybe. And the results will be coming here in a second. And interesting, this is really surprising. This is a little bit higher than maybe what I see in the US, but almost 2/3 of you, 66, 67%, are looking at building an academy. That's an incredibly high number, and it actually brings a big smile to my face, because I think this is a really important step for us as a global learning community. So Kunal, let's go ahead and publish question number 5, our very last one. And the question is, I know what an academy is and how to build one for my organization. So let's go ahead and publish that question, and we'll get the results and put them up here in just a second here. So you should be seeing that on your screen. And I know what an academy is and how to build one for my organization. We'll give it a few more seconds here and we'll get the results. Yes, no, or maybe. It was interesting on the first question, there were no maybes, so it's a pretty decisive group, with 2/3 saying yes and 1/3 saying no. And we'll get the results here in a second, and the results are coming in. Wow, 75% are saying yes, they know what an academy is and how to build one for their organization. That is fantastic. And 25% are saying maybe. So let me go ahead and go back into my full screen mode here. And we'll go ahead and plow through this. So a couple more slides here and then we will go ahead and wrap. So first off, thank you for taking the polls. I enjoy being much more interactive with the audience. And so this whole idea of an academy, and so I think many of you, if you follow Josh Bersin, he launched his academy almost 18 months ago. And really, it was a lot of profound thinking around where is the market going? And as usual, Josh was slightly ahead of where the market was heading and kind of set the pace out there with this idea that what was needed at this point in time was an academy. Because an academy is a place where you go to study. It's also a place where you share skills and capabilities. It's also a place where best practices are captured. There's a social dimension to the academy. You don't visit it once, you visit it many different times, and it becomes part of your life and your community. So this idea of an academy is actually pretty profound. When we think about academies, it's really about integrating 4 different types of learning. And so there is micro learning that needs to happen on the academy. And so if you think about the support that organizations need on the job, and so if I'm a professional and I need some insights, this idea of micro learning, where can I go for a 3, 5, or 7-minute video or a short course on a topic that's important to me at that moment in time? It's also a place for macro learning. Where do I learn about big topics? If I put my HR hat on, how do I learn about, creating a strategy where people are a competitive advantage? Where do I learn about being agile? So again, academies are for micro learning and macro learning, but it's also for group learning. Where do you get together for events and sessions and the ability to share information? So one of the things that we've really discovered from the academy aspect, if you don't have a strong social dimension to your academy, boy, you're really missing out on a very important component that's going to really help your learning. So it's great to have standalone micro, it's great to have macro, include this social piece and this idea of group learning. And then also on the job, where can I go for coaching and developmental assignments and mentorship and exposure? And so what we find in many of our initial conversations with organizations who are thinking about building an academy, many focus on the macro, some focus on the macro and micro, even a smaller number think about the social component, and even a smaller number think about the on-the-job learning. So my challenge to all of you, as you think about your academies, think about the holistic experience for your learners, and weaving all of these components together will really make a difference as you think about your academy. And one of the things that we found inside the academy is, how do you measure capability? And I want to share this with you. From our perspective, there's a lot of debate out there around how do you measure capability. One of the ways that we've gotten away from basically the complexity of it is we've created a very simple scale that says, hey, listen, I'm a novice. I'm not sure what this is. I've never done it before. I'm a beginner. I've kind of tried this once before, but I'm not ready to do it independently. Experienced is, I've done this before, and I think I could actually do this independently. Expert is, I've not only done it independently, but I can actually lead this project, and I have a lot of confidence that I can measure and drive an impact. And then world class is, people outside your organization are coming to you for that capability. So one way to think about measuring capability, because that comes up in so many conversations around the academy. We've talked about this a little bit before, and just wanted to circle back that the academies really offer the opportunity to drive that deep functional or high priority topics for your particular organization. So what are the key steps then for your academy? And these are just lessons we've learned, and I've tried to consolidate them all to one slide. So let me just take you through that. So if you think about the academy, make sure that somebody, in this case maybe the learning leader, actually has an enterprise strategy for academies. I've started to see some organizations, once they get the academy bug, that they're starting to just have an explosion of academies across the organization. So there's got to be and that can lead to confusion and actually take away from their impact. So someone's got to own the enterprise strategy. How many? Is it time bound to achieve a goal, or is this a permanent academy? How do you measure success? What about the funding for the academy? Is it coming from the center? Is it coming from learning? Is it funded by a business or a certain business leader? Then what type of academy are we talking about? Is it a functional academy to teach skills like in HR or in finance? Or is it topical, like emerging skills around data science or something like that? What are the academy components that you're going to try to enable? We talked about that a couple minutes ago. Is it just for learning? Is it also a place for best practices and things for on the job? Is there a community aspect to this where people can learn from each other and share from a social perspective what they're doing? One of the things that so many organizations leave off is number 3, governance. Who owns it? Is it learning? Is it the business? Is it someone else? How do you have the governance for it, through a dean or some other kind of mechanism? Who's going to make decisions about the content and the structure and the blend of learning and best practices and community? That's typically a dean. Who's going to be that dean, and how do you measure performance? Governance over academy components. When are you going to publish content? When is content retired? What gets to be put on the academy? What doesn't go on the academy? And do you have an annual review against strategic goals of the Academy? So in number 0, I talked about what is the strategy. Number 3 is you should have an annual review process. Is the Academy actually meeting its goals? What about faculty? Is it going to be permanent? Is it going to be volunteers? Who's going to teach? Who's going to curate? These are all questions you should lay out, very explicitly. And who's the target audience? Is it an open academy that anybody in the organization can just join? Or is it curated in by invite only, right? To be able to get into the academy, are there certain gates that you have to go through? So as you think about your academy, these 6 questions on this slide are ones that come up over and over again. And I would just encourage you to at least have an answer for each one as you go through your particular academy structure. And then I'm going to close, and this is the very last slide, and it's how do you accelerate learning? And it's going to go back to some of the lessons we learned from the pandemic. And this extends well beyond the pandemic. It's about creating resilience and agility inside the organization. So the pandemic taught us that you need to have some sort of centralized visibility to the data and the ability to drive direction from the center and execute locally, right? And so that's kind of an agility piece. So if your systems are not set up to actually drive the data and provide data, then that's a core strategic investment you really need to think about making. The need for agility was overwhelming. Flexible learning, oh my goodness, the amount of learning that occurred during the first few months of the pandemic was incredible. And in talking to some of our friends in other organizations, there was when you moved from the office on a Wednesday afternoon at 3 p.m. and everybody went to their homes, and that Thursday morning they were expected to start up, there were a lot of questions on how do I actually set up my camera, my team's environment, how do I actually do things? There was a lot of social learning. So this high adaptability to a lot of ambiguity was really, really critical. Then there were questions around, it raised really serious questions around the learning org models. Are you agile enough? Can you flex? Did you have the right skills and the right quantity? Are you using technology in its fullest? And I really kind of have to step back for a second. I know this is not a commercial to be selling anything, but this really comes from the heart. In talking to a lot of organizations that had really thoughtful outsourcing partners like an NIIT, really were able to go through this whole learning org and agility much quicker than organizations that had a very rigid or static model. And so strategically using a partner like NIIT actually created a lot of agility for organizations during the pandemic and gave them some flexibility. So some of the action items as you think about accelerating learning in the context of academies and everything we're talking about, is your core learning organization really set up for agility? Have you centralized some of the key capabilities and utilized technology to its fullest? Are you able to do the administrative and the reporting and the analytics and manage the content and the technology stack? And probably a time to kind of rethink again what could be insourced and outsourced to create agility and flexibility for the organization. So with that concludes my presentation. And I'm going to go ahead and pause here. I'm willing to stay on for a couple of minutes and see if there are any questions, but hopefully it was informative. And I do have a question that came in through the chat. Wooden skills, but then demonstrate part and capabilities. Thought it is terminology. Wooden skills demonstrate part and the capabilities, the underlying part. I think it goes back to this overwhelming debate that we have around skills versus capability. So the skill can be measured through traditional learning. So I actually take a course, then I take a class, and I take a test, and then I actually demonstrate the skill. The key with the capability is you're now wrapping context, right, around this. So one of the things that I joke about on a very personal level, I enjoy cooking, right? So I will go out and watch a YouTube video from Gordon Ramsay, and in 5 minutes, he will make something miraculous. So I have the skills, I know exactly how to do it. I don't have the capability yet because when I go in the afternoon and translate what Gordon did on YouTube, it doesn't come out quite the same. So developing a capability is how you apply the skill in the context with all the variables around you, and you understand how to adapt and flex around that. And the last question is, are there any recommendations on academy structure and governance. Yes, and that's why I really included that second to the last slide, being explicit and having the governance and the strategy. And so a couple of key thoughts to leave you with. What is the purpose of the academy? Is it time bound, right? Are we going to spend 1 year building out digital skills? And so we're going to set up an academy for 1 year and understanding what success looks like? Or is this an academy that's going to endure over time because we're supporting a function and we're building long-term skills? So understanding the purpose of the academy then will help you understand the governance that is needed around the academy. So if you spend a little bit of time upfront understanding the purpose of the academy and what success looks like, then it can go into a governance model. And at the very least, I would encourage an annual review process and a stakeholder committee based on the topic. And so again, if it's a functional academy, let's say like an HR academy, I think an annual review with a CHRO around achieving the goals would be warranted, right? And so understanding the concept of the academy, what you're trying to achieve, will drive the governance model. And if you want to go deeper on that, reach out to your colleagues at NIIT and they can get hold of me, and more than happy to have a deep dive on Academy beyond what we talked about today. So with that, I think we are at time. Again, it's been an honor and a pleasure to speak at so many Confluence events and to be part of the NIIT family and working with all of you. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it back over to the host.
Thank you, William. It was indeed very informative. William is also fondly